Oh, and as Richard said, this is the first December in, the first Sunday in December. Happy December. So good morning and welcome to One Heart, One Mind, Center for Spiritual Living's online Sunday service. Welcome to December. And our monthly theme for December is really a good one. It's celebrating divine truth, which seems so appropriate for a month in which I think Richard also said this, in which we celebrate several major religious holidays. So in this season, which really is the darkest time of the year, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, we celebrate the light of divine truth. And my original talk title for this morning began as Welcoming the Shadow. And as often happens when I start putting together my message, the title kind of morphs into something more. And today, this week, it morphed into Welcoming the Shadow as we stand in the light. Because while it is not always comfortable welcoming our shadow, before we can fully stand in the divine light, we have to be willing to recognize and to welcome the shadow. And so what is it that we are calling the shadow? Psychologist Carl Jung, who's famous for talking about the shadow, said that the shadow is the person that we'd rather not be. I like that. He explained that the shadow is the side of our personality which we would not consciously display in public. We wouldn't bring it out and show it to everybody. Things that we'd really rather keep hidden inside because they're kind of uncomfortable for us. And for heaven's sakes, if anybody knew these deep, dark secrets about me, they certainly wouldn't think that I was worthy of love. It's that part of us that the shadow represents, things about ourselves that we think are unlovable and might even cause us to feel guilt or shame. And whether that's warranted or not, it is sometimes what we hold inside. So I've come to look at our shadow self as just an aspect of being human, the flip side of our divine nature, if you will. In our physical world, there's all kinds of duality. There's life and death, good and evil, hope and resignation. And if we know at all what it means to be courageous, it's because at some time we've experienced fear. So duality is just part of our human existence, our human experience. And we're these human animals that are trying to navigate our way in a physical world. And so we recognize that we live in this dual physical universe. However, there is also another part of us, the higher nature of ourselves, our God self, our divine self. Sometimes we call it the witness or the observer self. I like to call it that because it is that part of me that is not in the world or of the world, but is viewing it from a different perspective. So we're talking about our connection to the realm that exists beyond the world of duality, beyond the physical world. And it is in our oneness with divine consciousness that we're equipped to navigate our humanness, that we're equipped to navigate this physical world that looks like pairs of opposites, if you will. This is what equips us to handle the experience of duality and everything else that we encounter in our human lives from a place of wholeness, because when we're in that observer, that God self, that witness self, we are in wholeness, that part of us that is always whole, that can never be injured in any way. And when we view our humanness from our wholeness, we are looking from the perspective of our divine nature, which is always in us. Our thoughts and our feelings create these patterns of energy within us. And often the things that we encounter in our human experiences that have not moved fully through us, but have stayed in us things that might have been traumatic or painful or just plain uncomfortable, rather than letting that energy of the experience move through us, sometimes we repress it or we try to ignore it. And because it's just too uncomfortable for us to feel. But this is those unresolved issues that become a part of us that really we might refer to as the shadow part of ourselves, those parts that we'd rather ignore because, you know, they just aren't fun. They're just not really what we wanted to have. But this unresolved or repressed energy becomes these powerful obstacles or blocks to the flow of the divine life that naturally moves through us. It wants to move through us. Imagine they're like stones in a stream that obstruct the natural flow of the water, the natural flow of life that moves through us. You know, and then the water has to navigate around these obstacles. Well, the flow of energy that naturally wants to move through us, that is coming through us from our source has to navigate around these obstacles or these trapped energies that we have not let pass through us, that have become part of what we might want to call the shadow self. And, you know, the shadow is simply a metaphor for this blocked energy, you know, but and that's a good way to look at it from a metaphorical perspective. But to help us understand how the shadow works, I want to look at how a real shadow in the physical world is actually created. So bear with me here for a minute. Shadows are formed because light travels in a straight line. A shadow is formed when an opaque object or some kind of material is placed in the path of the straight rays of light. And of course, that opaque material doesn't let the light pass through it. I need to get a drink of water. Hang on for a second. My tongue is getting a little twisted. Thank you. And that opaque material stops the rays from going past it. And the outline that is created from the rays going around the side, but not where the light is blocked, is the shadow. That's what we call the shadow. The place where the opaque material gets in the way of the rays of light is the dark area called the shadow. So we've all seen shadows of our body on a sunny day, you know, and their size is determined by the angle of the sun. I love in the morning, sometimes when we're walking, we'll get up on the crest of the hill and the sun will be behind us. And we have these long, like spider legs of our shadows, and it looks really beautiful. So the size is determined by the angle of the sun and the shadows that are made by blocking that light. You know, and hold that thought for a minute, that opaque or dense material that doesn't let the light through is the image or the silhouette of the light that moves around it, our shadow self. So I want to digress just a minute and move into something else, but hang on to the idea that shadows are made from blocking the light. So in the science of mind tradition, we teach that it's our subconscious or our subjective mind that is the seat of the creative process. That's where the creative process really begins. It really takes shape from there. And that it is here that our thoughts and our feelings flow with the light of creative law and demonstrate as our lives. We all know how the creative process moves through our subjective mind and demonstrates into our life. So it's here in our subjective mind that we plant the seed of what will become our light. So let's say that opaque object, which creates the shadows, is within our subjective mind, that they are the opaque objects that are blocking the light, blocking the flow of energy that wants to flow freely through us. And what we create in the world as our experience, anything in our lives, our relationships, our prosperity, our health, our work in the world, will be the shape of our shadow, will be the shape of these objects, of this blocked energy that gets stuck in there, that keeps the flow of life from moving freely. So the flow of life has to move around this blocked energy, and our shadow is reflected in our lives. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So imagine that the energy is trying to move through us, and our shadow self is blocking the way, and it is being reflected out in everything that we see in our lives. And all of those areas that I just talked about is a reflection of that shadow that is unhealed. And our job is to work on releasing that that blocked energy that we've stored in there, and that is creating the shadow. Because until we get it out of the way, pretty much everything that we create will reflect in some way, to some degree, that shadow self, that block from whatever it was that created it. Maybe it was a trauma as a child, maybe it was just a cultural belief that we internalized, maybe somebody said something to us as in our childhood that has stuck with us, and we just haven't been able to move past it. And don't get me wrong, we will still see duality even when we get rid of the blockages. You know, things are going to come up, but the things that present themselves in our lives won't throw us off balance when we allow that life force to move through us unencumbered or unobstructed. When we move out those obstacles, those opaque objects that are creating the shadows in our physical world. And as we learn to let our higher self shine, you know, its light will move out into everything and everyone we touch and everyone we see. We can learn that we don't have to bat things away, and we don't have to repress things that come our way, that we can actually just greet things as they come, feel them, and let them move through us. And the more firmly we stand in our light, that light of the higher self, our God self, the more we can begin to create everything from our alignment with God, and not from our shadows, not from whatever has gotten in the way of the full flow of that divine light that wants to effortlessly move through us. You know, one of the things, another thing that Jung said about the shadow is that he said that when something remains unconscious, which is really what I've been talking about, the shadow, we tend to project it onto other individuals or other groups. Anybody else ever do that? I certainly have been guilty of that. Anything that we judge in others is often the hidden part of ourself that we want to deny, that we want to repress, that we don't want to look at. So we project our shadow onto others. We think, well, it's not me, it's you, it's them. Projecting our shadow onto others reminded me, as I was putting my talk together, it reminded me of the story about the scapegoat. I don't know if you've heard it or not. I think I might have shared it one point or another, but I'm sure that the story has its roots in that biblical story of the scapegoat in Leviticus, but this one has a little bit of a twist. So I'm gonna tell you the story. So the story goes that there was a nomadic tribe that lived out in the wilderness. And they believed that anything bad or unpleasant that happened to them, anything at all, the weather, illness, any kind of misfortune, was a punishment from the gods for anything they had done wrong, for any of their transgressions at all. So in an attempt to atone for their faults, their shadows, if you will, they developed an elaborate ritual designed to show their repentance. And they would take turns laying their hands on a goat. And they would symbolically transfer their transgressions onto the goat, that poor goat. And of course, the goat was called the scapegoat. Makes sense, right? And then they would drive this poor goat out into the desert wilderness to die. So the story goes that one small goat was chosen to be that particular year's scapegoat. And he was freaked out after everybody had laid their hands on him and transferred their transgressions onto him. And they started shouting at him and throwing rocks to drive him out into the desert, where he would eventually, they thought, die with their transgressions. And so here he was out in the darkness, scared to death and just shivering, couldn't see anything. And he was just waiting for some wild animal to come and make him make him their dinner. But nobody came. And he just sat there in the dark for a little while until finally he heard this kindly voice in the dark saying, "Oh, you look tired and you look hungry, and don't worry, come with me and I'll give you food and rest." And the scapegoat turned and he saw a man, the outline of a man with a staff in his hand, gesturing for him to come and follow him. So he did. And they walked for a while and they finally came to a camp with lots of men and women and children and this big, huge herd of goats, including some of his friends who had been scapegoats in previous years. They had all been found by this man with the staff. And the man said, "These are the goats who have been driven out in past years. And until people are willing to look deeply into themselves and face their fears, until they will befriend and own their own shadows, they will continue to be scapegoats, just like you." So let's call the man with the staff our higher self, and our ability to see everything from our witness self, from that higher self, through the lens, through the connection with peace and calm and the wholeness of God. You know, our scapegoats are just another way for us to deal with our shadow. And when we repress our shadows, when we block the energy of the things that we don't want to experience, then we create these shadows. You know, it takes a lot of energy to repress a shadow, to repress something we don't want to feel. It's a little bit like taking a big beach ball and trying to push it down under the water. It takes a lot of strength and a lot of energy to keep it down there. Energy that we could be using to create a much better life. It's exhausting trying to keep that energy pushed down below all the time, down where we think we don't have to deal with it. But the reality is that when we repress it, when we push it down where we think we don't have to deal with it, it is actually running our lives. And when it gets way too much for us to continue to hold it down, we let it go, and that ball will come flying up and it will surely cause some trouble. This is when that energy gets expressed in our lives in very unhealthy ways. We've probably all experienced this when we've been so uncomfortable within us that we express that energy in a way that's really unkind or unhealthy. Anger, resentment, blame, judgment. So there's a really, really loud noise. And if we could have, I'm gonna mute whoever that was. Sorry about that. Oh my goodness. So what was I talking about? Oh, the way that the energy tends to, the unhealthy ways in which the energy can release itself when we get so tired of trying to hold it down under the water, under the level of our conscious mind. Our anger and resentment, blame, judgment, addictions of all kinds, alcohol, drugs. Often we try and avoid how we feel on the inside by changing something that's on the outside. But let me tell you from personal experience, nothing I do on the outside is going to make me feel better, maybe temporarily, but not in a permanent way, unless I fix what is on the inside. And the only way that I know how to do that is to express it in healthy ways, to bring it out into the light of day, bring the shadow into the light, just like the sun shining from right overhead so there is no shadow created, and to look at what it is that I haven't wanted to look at. You know, there's a middle way between repression and expressing in unhealthy ways, and that is to explore healing our shadow in healthy ways by looking at it and bringing it out into the light of truth. You know, I ran across this quote that I wanted to share with you. Let me get it up on the thing. Actually, it's from a man named Jacob Lieberman. I know absolutely nothing about Jacob, only that he understands the shadow pretty well. That's all I know about Jacob. So let me share, let me see if I can find the quote. It's such a great quote. Really spoke to me. Hang on a second. We're going to go here and here, and here's the quote. This is wonderful. Oh, let me move I don't know if you can see that, but I'm going to move. Whenever we block the light guiding our life, we create a shadow. Isn't that true? Whenever we block the light guiding our light, our inner source, we create a shadow. Only when we are transparent and in alignment with the source of light, as when the sun is directly overhead, does the shadow magically disappear. And the source of that light is always coming from within us. It's always there. You know, we don't have to look for it outside. It's always in us. It's a light from our divine source, our creator. God has the power to dispel our shadow and to allow the energy of love to move effortlessly through us. Don't you love the idea of standing in the flow? And can't you actually feel it when you're standing in the energy of the flow? You know, we live in a world that's constantly moving between what is possible in spirit and the pain or the discomfort that is all too common in our human lives. When we're living in alignment with divine love, which truly is our natural state, we're receiving that divine love constantly. It's always available to us. And then we naturally extend it outward into the world. That's what we mean when we say live in the light. God's love dwells within us and it naturally extends out from in every moment to everything and everyone around us, unless something blocks it, unless something gets in the way of our expression of it. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll see someone or hear something that I go into judgment about, and I judge something as not being deserving of my love. You ever do that? And I just want to draw our attention to the fact that in that moment, when we question the nature of love, that slight hesitation, when we aren't willing to express or extend the love that is within us to someone for some reason that we judge them unworthy, that is the moment when we block the light and build the shadow. That's the moment. It's in those little things. Remember that Holmes quote that I've been talking about for the last few weeks? It seems like I've used it a lot. It says that God is the self-givingness of life to itself. Well, we have to clear the way for that to happen. We have to be, as we talked about last week, grateful and cheerful receivers so that we can be grateful and cheerful givers. You know, Spirit doesn't look at a person who has made a mistake the same way we do and say, well, I'm going to punish that person and withhold love. Spirit doesn't do that, and that's our divine nature. Spirit points the way for us to course correct when things come up and invite us to look at them a new way. Spirit is inviting us to shift our consciousness, to move, recognize the shadow, to shed light on the shadow and move in a new direction. And that doesn't mean that we lose the ability to discern what life is showing us or to have healthy boundaries. Divine love isn't weakness, it's strength. The kind of strength that comes from that source within us, not from anything outside ourselves. It's strength that is not disturbed by what happens in the outside world, a strength that we can feel in our heart. You know, I don't know about you, but my heart is a lot wiser than my head. And and it does not seem to get in the way of the thoughts that keep streaming through me. Well, they certainly don't. Well, what did they do? I'm not loving them. You know, and Science of Mind teaches us some wonderful practices for moving the blocks, our shadows, and to assist us in standing in alignment with this divine truth that we're talking about all month in December. And some of the practices are for our quiet moments of stillness, when we go into a contemplation and reflection, when we sit in the stillness of our meditations, or when we do our prayer work, and specifically in Science of Mind, we do something called spiritual mind treatment. And while this is a wonderful thing to do, where we sit in the stillness and consciously align with the power of the divine within us, it's a beautiful place to go and become familiar with that witness or higher self. And I highly recommend it. And optimally, sometime in the morning and sometime in the evening is a good time to be in silent stillness and connect with it. But I have to say that, especially over the last few months, what I have truly come to believe, that the best way to practice engaging with and allowing the divinity within us to guide and direct our life is during our waking days, as we go about the business of our life. And it's here where I believe we are really given the opportunity to truly practice being present in every moment, to truly be present with whatever shows up, and to practice greeting everything without judgment, without trying to bat it away or repress it, but by practicing, even in the very challenging and uncomfortable moments, to let it be what it is, to let what is right in front of us in the moment be what it is. Not judge it, not just experience it. Isn't that right there in the present moment where we can do our best work, our most sacred work, and to use our tools to maybe greet something that is uncomfortable with a positive affirmation? Or you can do what I've been doing lately, and this is a practice that I've really been doing a lot in my life lately, is to take a deep breath. If it's something I really don't want to experience, and I relax and I let it go. I just let the experience come. And if it feels uncomfortable, I take a deep breath, I relax, and I release it. And it has been my experience that when I relax and I release, I begin to feel a shift in the way I experience that particular life event or moment that is right in front of me. You know, and that energy is no longer having to try and find a way to express itself around the blocks, because I've let it go. I've just relaxed. So try thinking, let's do this. Let's try thinking of a challenge that you may have in your life right now. Just bring any, it could be something big, it could be something little, it doesn't matter. Just something that you might find mildly annoying or really a deep issue. And draw it into your conscious awareness. And now I invite you to take a deep breath in. And as you begin to release that breath, just relax. Release the energy of resistance. Release the energy of repression, and just let it go. Just let it go. I think it really can be as simple as that. Every time anything comes up for you that's uncomfortable because it hits something in you that is blocking your ability to stand in the light, just take that deep breath. And you might even want to say Morgan's affirmation: everything always works out for me. Or I am standing in light. I release anything that blocks that light. And I think that in doing that, we can recognize that it's us that are standing in the way, and that nothing is putting itself on us. As a matter of fact, we've got a great story. I'm going to finish up with this last great story. I'm just going to read it. It's so cute. It's funny. It's a good light way to end our talk today. Let me see if I can find it. I wrote it down. Sometimes it's easier just to read a story. So here's the story. It's a Sufi story. Here it is. There was a man who visited a great mystic to find out how to get out of his chains of attachment and his prejudice, his shadows, if you will. And instead of answering him directly, the mystic jumped to his feet and bolted to an empty pillar, flung his arms around it, grasping the marble surface as he screamed, "Save me from this pillar! Save me from this pillar!" And the man who had asked the question could not believe what he saw. He thought the mystic was crazy. The shouting soon brought a crowd of people. "Why are you doing that?" the man asked. "I came to you to ask a spiritual question because I thought you were wise, but obviously you're crazy. You are holding on to the pillar. The pillar is not holding on to you. You can simply let it go." Ever feel that way? And of course, the mystic said to him, "If you can understand that, then you have the answer to your question. Your chains, your shadows are not holding you. You are holding them. You can simply let go." So today, and all days, may we all just relax and let go. May we be willing to experience anything within the safety and the peace of our God self, to shine the light on anything clearly and brightly as we release these blockages and these shadows that stand in the way of the full flow of life that wants to move freely through us. And we simply have to let go and breathe deeply, relax, and know all is well. So let's pray. Let's take a deep, centering breath in. I know that I am standing in the divine light of God, spirit, life, the all that is. It is the flow of energy that moves in and through and around and defines all life. It is beautiful and is loving. It is caring. It is compassionate. It is wise. It is strong, and yet it is gentle and soft. It contains within it everything, all aspects of life, all qualities of love. And I know that I am a part of this divine life. This divine source is surging through me with its energy, through my very bones and my blood and my beautiful body. And as it is so for me, it is so for every other living being on this beautiful mother herself. And it is flowing through the mother. So I speak my word for and about each and every person that is present on this call and each and every person that is not, that there is a shift, a new way of being, a gentle relaxing and letting go of anything unlike the full flow of this energy of love and beauty and wisdom and health and wholeness and compassion and kindness. It is all that exists, and it exudes through the flow of life through us in every imaginable area of our life. It is the fabric of our community. It is the fabric of our world. And it is here that we begin to create a beautiful, loving, diverse, accepting, wonderful, creative, loving world that works for everyone. So from this place of recognition, of acceptance, of this shift in consciousness and this new expression of life in the world, I simply say thank you. I know that it is already done as I speak these words, for it is already true in the divine mind and the divine life. And it is here that I allow it to spark the process of law, to create anew. So I relax in that, knowing all is well, and in gratitude and thanksgiving, we magnify its expression and experience in the world. And I take a deep breath. I know all is well and all is done, and I simply say, and so it is. Oh, Jackie's here. Hi, Jackie. Oh, and Marine is here. People came out. Well, hello, everyone. So